Los Angeles, August 2024. The evening air on Wilshire Boulevard is thick with heat, mingled with the scent of hot asphalt and the distant ocean. The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio glows with spotlight beams, and the hum of the crowd outside the walls sounds like the rumble before a storm. Tonight, Sylvester Stallone is here, a man whose films, for many Americans over 55, are not just movies, but a symbol of their lives, struggles, victories, and losses. But tonight's show, which was supposed to be light and nostalgic, will explode into a conflict that leaves everyone in shock. In the dressing room, Sylvester sits in front of the mirror. His gray hair is neatly combed, the dark gray blazer fits perfectly on his shoulders, but his eyes show tension. A talk show for him is like stepping into the ring, you never know where the punch will come from. He adjusts his cuff as he hears a knock on the door. "Mr. Stallone, the show starts in 1 minute," calls the assistant. "Coming," he replies, his voice low, like an engine just starting up. In the studio, Jimmy Kimmel reviews his notes. At 56, he expertly balances humor and provocation, but tonight he's in a different mood. America is boiling, political scandals, protests, accusations of media bias. Jimmy wants this show to be memorable, and Sylvester is the perfect guest to stir the pot. He adjusts his tie and whispers to himself, "Time to dig deeper." The lights flash, the orchestra plays, and Jimmy runs onto the stage to loud applause. The audience, mostly people over 50, hums with anticipation. They are here for Stallone, a man whose roles in Rocky and Rambo remind them of their own battles. Jimmy cracks a quick joke about the Los Angeles traffic, and the crowd laughs. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, meet the legend, Sylvester Stallone," he announces. The crowd erupts into applause. Sylvester walks out, his stride confident, but his eyes scan the studio carefully. He smiles, shakes Jimmy's hand, and sits down. The first few minutes go smoothly. They joke about age, about how Sylvester is still working on his muscles, about his new movie. The audience laughs when Jimmy shows an old picture of Sly in boxing shorts. But then the atmosphere shifts. Jimmy leans forward, his smile sharpens, and there's a slight tension in his voice. "Sylvester, your heroes have always fought against the system, against injustice. Today, America is divided. Some say they're being silenced, others scream about censorship. What do you think about this as a man who came up from the bottom?" The room falls silent. Sylvester feels the air grow heavier. He grips the armrest, but his face remains calm. "Jimmy, I believe in one thing. People need to talk to each other, not shout," he says, his voice firm but controlled. "I've seen how dialogue changes more than fists." The audience applauds, but Jimmy doesn't back down. He pulls out his next question, his eyes gleaming as though he's caught a scent of blood in the water. "Those are nice words, but let's be honest," he continues, his tone challenging. "A lot of people say Hollywood, including shows like this one, only promotes one point of view. People outside the big cities feel like their values, family, faith, work, are mocked. Have you ever felt like you were forced to play by someone else's rules?" Sylvester tenses up. His jaw clenches ever so slightly, but he holds his gaze steady on Jimmy. The audience holds its breath, the faint hum of cameras is the only sound. Behind the scenes, producers exchange worried looks, the conversation is teetering on the edge. "I've always played by my own rules," Sylvester replies, his voice slow but heavy like a punch. "But I've seen how people get pushed into a corner for their views. This isn't about Hollywood, it's about the fact that we stopped listening. If you want the truth, Jimmy, it's that everyone deserves a voice, not just the one who shouts the loudest." The room bursts into applause, but not everyone. Some whisper, some frown. Jimmy feels like he's losing control, and it annoys him. He throws his notes aside and goes all in. "And what about you personally?" His voice sharpens almost to a bite. "There are rumors that you've turned down roles because you didn't want to support certain ideas. Is that true? Or maybe you just avoid uncomfortable topics like so many in this industry." The silence in the studio becomes suffocating. Sylvester stares at Jimmy, and in his eyes, something dangerous flickers, not anger, but cold, steely resolve. He leans forward, his voice low, but cutting like a knife. "Jimmy, I've never avoided a fight, neither in life nor in film. But I choose my battles. You want to know why I turn down roles? Because I don't play in games where people use art to divide, not unite. If you need a sensation, look for it somewhere else. The room erupts, some applaud, others shout approval, but the tension hangs in the air like smoke. Jimmy forces a smile, but his eyes reveal irritation. He tries to steer the conversation back to humor, but the moment has already shifted everything. Behind the scenes, a producer whispers, "This is either going to blow up online, or we're getting shut down." Sylvester leans back in his chair, his face impassive, but his heart races. He knows he's just stepped onto thin ice, and this is only the beginning. The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio is still buzzing with attention left from Sylvester Stallone's sharp response. The bright spotlights seem hotter, and the hum of the crowd is muffled, as if everyone is waiting for the next blow. Sylvester sits in the chair, his posture relaxed, but his fingers lightly grip the armrest, the only hint of a storm inside. Jimmy Kimmel, forcing a smile, tries to diffuse the tension with a joke, but his eyes betray his uncertainty. He knows he's gone too far, but it's too late to back down now. All right, let's cool off a bit," Jimmy says, raising his hands as if surrendering. "Sylvester, tell us about your new movie." "It's a return to action, right?" The audience laughs, but the laughter is tense, like a violin before the string breaks. Sylvester nods, his voice returning to calm, but there's a barely perceptible weariness in it. "Yes, it's the story of a man who has lost everything, but still fights," he says. "You know, Jimmy, stories like these are close to me, because I've fallen and gotten back up many times myself." The audience applauds, this time more genuinely. People over 55 in the studio and at home feel a connection to these words. Many of them have experienced losses, economic crises, disappointments. But Jimmy can't stop. He feels the pressure from the producers through his earpiece, whispering, "Keep the pace, give more heat." And he digs deeper again. "That's interesting," Jimmy says, his smile turning into a sly grin. "But let me ask. You said lost everything. Have you ever felt like Hollywood turned its back on you? You know, there's this idea that people like you, those with traditional values, are just being pushed out of the industry. Is that true?" The room goes silent. Sylvester slowly turns his head toward Jimmy, his eyes narrowing. This isn't just a question, it's an accusation wrapped in the thin veil of curiosity. Behind the scenes, the producer grabs his head, whispering to his colleague, "He went too far." But Sylvester doesn't explode. He takes a deep breath, and when he finally speaks, his voice is quiet, but there's a force in it that makes everyone lean in closer. "Jimmy, I've been in this game for 50 years, he begins. I've been written off, mocked, told I wasn't an actor, just a bunch of muscles. But I'm still here. Not because I'm fighting everyone who's against me, but because I believe in what I do. If Hollywood is pushing anyone out, it's not because of values, but because of fear. Fear of hearing the truth, fear of showing real people with their real problems." The room erupts into applause, but this time there's something else in it, not just admiration, but anger, support, hope. Someone from the back shouts, "Tell them, Sly." Jimmy feels the ground slip from beneath him. He was supposed to be in control of the show, but now the stage belongs to Sylvester. However, Jimmy is not one to give up easily. He leans forward, his voice growing sharper. "But the truth can be different, right?" he says, and there's a faint touch of sarcasm in his tone. "You're talking about real people, but many think your movies are just fantasies for those nostalgic for the old days. What would you say to those who think your stories, how should I put it, are outdated?" The words hit like a stone in water, and a wave of tension rolls through the studio. Sylvester freezes, his face losing expression for a moment. This is a below-the-belt punch, and Jimmy knows it. The crowd murmurs, some whisper angrily, others wait, holding their breath. Behind the scenes, the assistant grabs the producer's arm. Did he just call Rocky outdated? But Sylvester doesn't explode. He slowly smiles, not a warm smile, but one that promises a storm. He leans toward Jimmy, his voice low and measured, but each word cuts like a blade. "Outdated," he repeats, and the studio becomes so quiet that the hum of the cameras can be heard. "You know, Jimmy, when I wrote Rocky, people told me no one would want to watch a story about a loser fighting for a chance. But people watched. And they still do. Because it's not about nostalgia, it's about the heart. About getting up even when the whole world is against you. If you think that's outdated, maybe you just haven't been listening to those who are still fighting. The room erupts into applause again, people jumping to their feet. A woman in the front row, elderly with gray hair, wipes tears away. A man behind her shouts, "That's my Sly." But Jimmy doesn't give up. He feels he's losing control, and it frustrates him. He opens his mouth to say something more, but suddenly, a voice from the audience shouts, loud, sharp, filled with emotion. "Why don't you let him speak the truth?" Yells a man in his 60s, his denim jacket worn, his face red from anger. "You media always twist things. Let him talk." Security tenses, but Sylvester raises his hand, stopping them. He stands up from his chair, his figure filling the stage like in the shots of his old movies. He looks at the man in the audience, and his voice, though calm, pierces everyone. "Sir, I appreciate your support," he says, "but I don't want to shout. I want us to talk. Not for the cameras, not for the ratings, just for real. Are you ready?" The man in the audience nods, his eyes sparkling. The crowd bursts into applause again, but this time there's something new in it, a feeling that something bigger than a show has just happened. Jimmy, confused, tries to steer the conversation back to a light-hearted tone. "Well, looks like we have a real Rocky moment here," he says, but his laughter sounds hollow. The show goes to commercial, and the cameras shut off, but the tension doesn't disappear. Behind the scenes, Sylvester silently walks to his dressing room, his face impassive, but his eyes, there's a storm in them. Jimmy stays on stage, his smile fading as soon as the lights go out. The producer rushes up to him. "Are you out of your mind?" he whispers. "This will either save the show or bury us." Meanwhile, in the audience, the man in the denim jacket, named Bill, turns to his wife sitting next to him. She squeezes his hand. "You did it," she whispers. "You said what we all think. This isn't the end," Bill replies, his voice trembling with determination. "I want to talk to him." He gets it. After the break, the show returns, but the atmosphere has changed. Jimmy tries to maintain a light tone, but his questions are more careful. Sylvester responds briefly, but each of his glances speaks louder than words. The audience feels they've witnessed something real, a moment when the masks were stripped away, and the truth, though painful, was laid bare. When the show ends, Sylvester leaves the stage to loud applause, but doesn't stop for photos or autographs. He heads to his dressing room, where an unexpected guest is waiting, Bill, the man from the audience. Security let him in on Sylvester's orders. They stand face to face, two fighters from different worlds, but with the same thirst for truth. "I didn't mean to ruin everything," Bill begins, his voice shaking, "but I'm tired of not being heard. I lost my job because of these new rules. My daughter is afraid to speak her mind because they'll label her. You said what I've been feeling for years." Sylvester looks at him, and his face softens. "I'm not a hero, Bill," he says, "but I know what it's like to be invisible. Tell me your story. Not for the cameras, just for me." Bill nods, and they sit down. Outside, the studio empties, but in this small dressing room, a conversation begins that could change more than any show. Sylvester listens as Bill talks about the factory closing, his daughter being afraid to speak out in college, about the feeling that the country he loves is slipping through his fingers. And in this conversation, there's no shouting, only the truth, painful but healing. Meanwhile, Jimmy sits in his dressing room, watching the show's replay on the monitor. His phone is exploding with messages, some praising his courage, some accusing him of provocation. He feels that this evening has changed not just the show, but him as well. The producer knocks on his door. "Social media is exploding," he says. "Half are calling Sly a hero, half want your head. What are we doing?" Jimmy sighs, his gaze falling on a photo of his family on the desk. "Let's give them another conversation," he says, but this time, a real one. The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio is buzzing with residual tension, like after a boxing match where no one lost, but no one won either. The spotlights hum, and the smell of floor polish mingles with the faint aroma of coffee being sipped by the assistants backstage. Sylvester Stallone sits in a chair, his face impassive, but his eyes are keenly watching Jimmy Kimmel, who is trying to salvage the show after a sharp argument. The audience, mostly people over 55, with calluses from life and a nostalgia for simpler times, murmurs, sensing they are witnessing something real. Jimmy, forcing a smile, tries to steer the conversation to safer ground. His hands tremble slightly as he picks up a glass of water. "All right, Sylvester, let's relax a bit," he says, striving for ease. "Tell us about your new movie. It's an action film, right? Fans are expecting explosions and classic Sly, right?" The crowd laughs, but it's a nervous laugh, like the calm before a storm. Sylvester nods, his voice calm but with a barely perceptible note of fatigue. "It's a story about a man who fights for what he loves, even when everything is against him," he replies. "Roles like that are close to me, Jimmy. I've fallen and gotten back up more times than I can count." The audience applauds, feeling the connection. Many in the crowd remember the 80s when losing a job or a dream seemed like the end of the world, but they rose, like Rocky. However, Jimmy can't stop. In his earpiece, the producer whispers, "Push, but carefully." Jimmy leans forward, his smile sharp. "That's cool, but let me dig a little deeper," he says, his voice taking on a challenge. "You're talking about fighting, but some people think your stories, how should I put it, are detached from reality. People today aren't fighting in the ring, they're fighting mortgages, social media censorship, the feeling that no one hears them. What would you say to those who think your movies are just fairy tales for those stuck in the past?" The silence in the studio becomes oppressive, like the calm before thunder. Sylvester freezes, his jaw clenching ever so slightly. The question is like a slap, and the audience feels it. Some mutter indignantly, others hold their breath. Backstage, an assistant grabs the producer's sleeve. Did he just insult Rocky? But Sylvester doesn't explode. He slowly smiles, not a warm smile, but one that promises a storm. His voice, when he speaks, is low and measured, but it cuts like steel. "Fairy tales, Jimmy," he repeats, and the room holds its breath. "When I wrote Rocky, I slept in my car. I had $106 and a dream that everyone called crazy." People watched Rocky because they saw themselves, not the champion, but the one who gets up after being knocked down. If you think fighting for family, for truth, for a chance, is a fairy tale, then you haven't been listening to the people sitting in this room. The crowd erupts in applause, people jumping to their feet. A woman in the front row, with gray hair and tired eyes, claps as if it's her personal victory. A man behind shouts, "Tell them, Sly." But Jimmy doesn't back down. He feels he's losing control, and it angers him. He opens his mouth to say something else, but suddenly, from the audience, a voice rings out, loud, hoarse, filled with pain. "Why won't you let him tell the truth?" shouts a man in his 60s, wearing a worn-out denim jacket. His face is flushed, his hands trembling. "You, the media, always twist things. Let him say what he thinks." Security moves toward him, but Sylvester raises his hand, stopping them. He stands, his presence filling the stage like an old movie frame. He looks at the man, and his voice, though calm, cuts through everyone. "Sir, I hear you," he says. "And I don't want to shout. I want us to talk. Not for the cameras, not for the show, but for real. Are you with me?" The man nods, his eyes shimmering with tears. The crowd bursts into applause again, but this time there's something more, a feeling that the walls between people have cracked. Jimmy, flustered, tries to steer the show back to humor. "Well, looks like we've got a moment from Rocky IV, he says, but his laugh sounds empty. The show cuts to a commercial break, and the cameras turn off, but the tension lingers. Sylvester heads to the dressing room, his steps heavy but sure. Jimmy sits on stage, his smile fading the moment the lights go out. The producer rushes over. "Social media's already on fire," he says. "Half are calling Sly a hero, half want your resignation. What do we do?" Jimmy sighs, looking at the empty studio. "Let them have what they want," he says. "But this time, no games." Part 3, The Shadows of Truth. The next day, Los Angeles wakes up to the buzz of news. A video from the Jimmy Kimmel Live show is spreading like wildfire. The hashtags #SlicePeaks and #KimmelFail rack up millions of views. Some call Sylvester the voice of the unheard, others accuse him of populism. Jimmy reads the headlines in his apartment, holding a cup of coffee that's gone cold. Kimmel vs. Stallone, did the show end in disaster? Screams one website. Sylvester Stallone challenges Hollywood, writes another. His phone is blowing up with messages, but he doesn't answer. For the first time in years, he feels his mask as the cheerful host has cracked. Meanwhile, Sylvester sits in his Beverly Hills home, gazing at the pool where the morning sun reflects. His wife Jennifer walks in with a tablet. "Did you see this?" she asks, showing a post on social media. "People are saying you said what they were too afraid to say themselves." "I didn't plan that," Sylvester replies, his voice quiet. "But I couldn't stay silent." "And now what?" she asks, sitting next to him. "Someone has to start speaking," he says. "Not shouting, but talking." That same day, Sylvester gets a call from his agent, Mark. Mark's voice is tense. "Sly, the show wants you back. They're offering a special episode, you, Jimmy, and that guy from the audience. They're calling it the conversation of the century." "Is this a trap?" Sylvester asks, his eyes narrowing. "Maybe. Maybe not," Mark answers. "But if you refuse, they'll say you're scared. If you go, you risk everything." Sylvester is silent, looking at an old photo on the shelf, him in boxing gloves, young, with fire in his eyes. He knows this isn't just a show. It's a fight, not for ratings, but for something more. Meanwhile, in a modest house in the suburbs of Los Angeles, Bill, the man in the denim jacket, sits at the kitchen table. His wife Marge places a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. "You've become a star," she says, smiling. "All the neighbors are talking about your shout." "I'm not a star," Bill mutters, his hands trembling. "I'm just tired of not being heard. I lost my job because I wouldn't sign their new code of conduct. My daughter's afraid to write in college about what she thinks. And now Sly. He gets it. And what will you do?" Marge asks. "If he wants to speak, I'm ready," Bill replies, his voice hardening. Part 4, the final scene. A week later, the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio is filled once again. But this time, the atmosphere is different, not festive, but tense, like before a court session. The spotlights are softer, the music quieter. Jimmy stands on stage, his usual smile replaced by a serious expression. He looks into the camera. "Today, we're not just doing a show," he begins. "We want to talk. For real. Please welcome our guests, Sylvester Stallone and Bill Thompson." The audience applauds, but the claps are restrained, as if people are afraid to ruin the moment. Sylvester steps out first, his stride confident, but his eyes scan the studio intently. Bill follows, awkward in a new shirt that Marge made him wear. They sit across from Jimmy, and the cameras zoom in, capturing every move. Jimmy starts cautiously. "Sylvester, Bill, thank you for being here. Last week let's say we stirred some things up. People are still talking about it. What do you want to say today?" Sylvester looks at Bill, giving him the floor. Bill clears his throat, his hands gripping his knees. "I'm not used to cameras," he starts. "But I'm here because I'm tired of being silent. I worked at a factory for 30 years. Last year, they forced us to sign papers, some rules saying we couldn't say what we think. I refused. They fired me. My daughter's afraid to write an essay in college because she might get branded. I'm not against change, but why do we have to lose ourselves?" The audience quiets, but in the silence, there are murmurs of approval. Jimmy nods, his face serious. "That's a hard story, Bill," he says. "Sylvester, what do you think?" Sylvester leans forward, his voice calm but firm. "Bill, I hear you. And I know you're not alone. I grew up in a poor neighborhood where every day was a fight. But I learned one thing: if you want change, you don't shout, you speak. Not to win, but to understand. We're all here, in this country, fighting for one thing: the right to be heard. The audience applauds, but this time there's warmth in their claps. Jimmy looks at them, and for the first time that evening, his smile is genuine. "You know, I thought this show was about ratings," he says. "But I was wrong. I grew up in Vegas, in a simple family. And I see that we all want the same thing, for us not to be divided into right and wrong. Maybe we should start there." Sylvester nods, his eyes softening. "This is the beginning, Jimmy. But this is just the first round." Bill smiles, his shoulders relaxing. "I'm ready for the next one," he says. The show ends to loud applause, but this time, there's no tension, only hope. The cameras turn off, but Sylvester, Bill, and Jimmy remain on stage, talking quietly, without microphones. Behind the scenes, the producer frowns. The ratings will be high, but this isn't the show he planned. Yet, he knows something has changed.